My name is Amanda, and I wish I could take it back. The joke, the laugh, the casual way I dismissed his feelings that night, it all seemed so harmless in the moment. Now, looking back, I see it for what it was, the moment that broke us. It started on a Friday night, one of the rare evenings when we had the house to ourselves. Our kids, Mia and Ethan, were at my parents' for the weekend, and Eric, my husband of 8 years, had decided to cook dinner. A thoughtful gesture I probably didn't appreciate enough. I remember walking into the kitchen to see him carefully plating pasta, the smell of garlic and basil filling the air. He'd even set the table with candles and a bottle of wine. "What's the occasion?" I teased, leaning against the counter. Eric glanced up and smiled, a little shyly. "Just thought it'd be nice to have a night for us, you know." I nodded, a part of me touched by the effort, but another part, the one that was tired and distracted by the weight of a busy week, didn't fully engage. I'd grown used to Eric doing these little things for me. He was the steady one in our marriage, the dependable husband and father who never let us down. We sat down to eat, and the conversation flowed easily at first. Work, the kids, plans for the weekend. But as the wine flowed, the topics drifted, and we found ourselves reminiscing about the early days of our relationship. "Remember how nervous you were on our first date?" I teased, swirling the wine in my glass. Eric chuckled, a faint blush creeping up his cheeks. "Of course. You were way out of my league." I laughed, feeling the warmth of the wine loosen my words. "I wouldn't say that. But, you know—" I trailed off, hesitating for a moment before saying something I should have kept to myself. "You weren't my first choice back then." The words slipped out casually, accompanied by a laugh I thought would soften the blow. Eric froze, his fork hovering over his plate. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice even but his eyes searching mine. I waved a hand, brushing it off. "Oh, come on, Eric. You know what I mean. Back when we started dating, I was still getting over Mark. It's not like I was head over heels for you right away." His expression shifted, the smile fading from his face. "I didn't realize that," he said quietly. I shrugged, trying to keep the mood light. "Well, obviously, I made the right choice in the end, didn't I?" But the damage was done. The rest of the evening passed in awkward silence, Eric retreating into himself while I pretended not to notice. At bedtime, he turned off the light without saying goodnight, and I brushed it off, assuming he'd let it go by morning. But he didn't. The next day, I found Eric sitting in the living room, staring blankly at his laptop. I leaned over the back of the couch, playfully ruffling his hair. "Still mad about last night?" He didn't laugh. "I'm not mad," he said, his voice flat. "Then what is it?" I pressed. He turned to look at me, his eyes heavy with something I couldn't quite place. "Do you really think of me as your second choice?" I sighed, frustrated by his persistence. "Eric, it was a joke. You're taking this way too seriously." "It didn't feel like a joke," he said. "It felt like the truth." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was being dramatic, but something about the way he looked at me stopped me. There was a vulnerability in his expression that made me uncomfortable. "I didn't mean it like that," I said, softening my tone. "I love you, Eric. You know that." But he didn't seem convinced. Instead, he stood up, walked past me without a word, and disappeared upstairs. That was the beginning of the distance between us. Over the next few weeks, Eric became quieter, more withdrawn. He stopped initiating conversations, spent more time at work, and began going out with friends more often than usual. I told myself it was just a phase, that he'd snap out of it eventually. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. It wasn't until I found him texting Katie, a coworker I'd heard him mention a few times, that I realized how much trouble we were in. "Who's Katie?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. He looked up, startled. "She's just a friend. Why?" "You've been texting her a lot lately," I said, holding up his phone. Eric's expression darkened. "I don't have to explain myself to you," he said, grabbing the phone from my hand. His defensiveness stung, and for the first time, I felt a pang of fear. Was I losing him? Eric's quiet withdrawal became impossible to ignore. At first, I chalked it up to work stress or maybe lingering irritation from my comment at dinner. But as the days turned into weeks, it was clear this was something deeper. He stopped greeting me with his usual smile when he came home from work. Conversations became clipped, filled with polite but empty words. Even the way he interacted with our kids felt different. His patience with them intact, but his joy seemed muted. The shift was subtle at first, but it grew louder in the silences between us. One evening, I tried to bridge the gap. He was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone while I cooked dinner. "So," I said, trying to sound cheerful, "Mia's school play is next week. Are you still planning to take the afternoon off?" He glanced up, his face unreadable. "I'll see if I can." That was it. No smile, no warmth, just a non-committal response. "Eric," I said, putting down the knife I was using to chop vegetables, "are we going to talk about this?" "About what?" he asked, not looking up. "About whatever's going on with you," I said, my voice tinged with frustration. "You've been distant, and I feel like I'm walking on eggshells all the time." He set his phone down and finally met my eyes. "Do you want the truth?" "Yes," I said, though my stomach churned at the seriousness in his tone. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about what you said that night. About being your second choice." I groaned, exasperated. "Eric, I told you it was a joke. How many times do I have to say that?" "It didn't feel like a joke," he said, his voice steady but firm. "It felt like the truth. And the more I think about it, the more I realize it explains a lot." "Explains what?" I shot back, my defensiveness kicking in. "The way you talk to me," he said, his tone calm but cutting. "The way you look at me when I make mistakes. Like I'm just the guy you settled for because your first choice didn't work out." "That's not fair," I said, crossing my arms. "I've supported you in everything. I've stood by you through all the ups and downs." "And yet," he said, leaning forward, "it feels like no matter what I do, it's never enough. I've spent years trying to make you happy, Amanda, but I'm starting to think you don't even see me for who I am. You just see what I'm not." His words hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. "I didn't mean to hurt you," I said quietly. He nodded, his expression softening slightly. "I know you didn't mean it, but that doesn't make it hurt any less." Things didn't get better after that. If anything, they got worse. Eric's emotional withdrawal deepened, and I felt like I was constantly chasing him, trying to fix something I didn't fully understand. Then came Katie. I noticed her name pop up on his phone more frequently, and though I tried to brush it off at first, it became harder to ignore. One night, while Eric was in the shower, I couldn't resist the urge to look at his messages. The texts weren't overtly romantic, but they were personal. He told her about his day, shared jokes, even mentioned our arguments. My chest tightened as I scrolled. When he came out of the bathroom, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, his phone in my hands. "What the hell, Amanda?" he said, his voice sharp as he grabbed the phone from me. "What is this?" I demanded, pointing at the messages. "Why are you telling her about our marriage?" "She's a friend," he snapped. "Someone I can actually talk to without being dismissed or ridiculed." His words cut deep. "So you're running to another woman because I made one stupid comment?" He shook his head, his jaw tightening. "This isn't about one comment. This is about years of feeling like I'm not good enough for you." I didn't know what to say. For the first time, I felt the cracks in our marriage spreading wider, and I couldn't shake the fear that this was more than just a rough patch. Eric started staying late at work more often, and when he was home, he spent most of his time on his phone or in his office. The warmth that used to define our relationship was gone, replaced by a cold, polite distance that felt impossible to bridge. And the worst part? I couldn't tell if I was angrier at him for pulling away, or at myself for driving him to it. The day I realized I might actually lose, Eric started like any other. He left for work early, barely saying goodbye, and I spent the morning cleaning the house, trying to distract myself from the growing distance between us. But the silence in our home was suffocating. Every empty room reminded me of how far apart we'd grown. By the afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to confront him directly, to force a conversation about what was happening between us. I picked up my phone and called him. It rang twice before he answered. Amanda, he said, his tone clipped. I'm at work. What is it? We need to talk, I said firmly. Can you come home early tonight? There was a long pause on the other end. I'll try, he said finally, his voice heavy with hesitation. That evening, Eric came home later than usual. I was waiting for him in the living room, my nerves frayed from rehearsing what I was going to say. Hey, I said as he walked in. Hey, he replied, his tone neutral. He set his bag down and sat on the couch across from me, not meeting my eyes. We need to talk, I began, echoing the words I'd said earlier. He nodded, leaning back and crossing his arms. Okay, talk. I hesitated, suddenly unsure of how to start. I know things haven't been great lately, I said carefully. And I know it's because of what I said that night. I messed up, Eric. I shouldn't have said it, and I'm sorry. He sighed, his expression unreadable. I appreciate the apology, Amanda, but this isn't just about that night. You know that, don't you? What do you mean? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. It's everything, he said, his voice steady but tired. It's the way you talk to me, the way you dismiss me when I try to tell you how I feel, that comment about being your second choice. It just made me realize how little you respect me. That's not true, I said quickly. I respect you, Eric. I love you. Do you? He interrupted, his voice rising slightly. Because it doesn't feel that way. It feels like I've spent years trying to prove myself to you, and no matter what I do, it's never enough. I'm tired, Amanda. I'm so damn tired. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. For the first time, I saw just how much I'd hurt him, not just with my comment, but with every careless word, every dismissive laugh, every time I'd brushed off his feelings as unimportant. I didn't realize it was that bad, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded slowly, his eyes filled with a sadness I'd never seen before. That's the problem, Amanda. You didn't realize. And now, I don't know if I can do this anymore. Eric, please, I said, my voice cracking. We can fix this. We can go to therapy, talk to someone, anything. Just don't give up on us. He shook his head, his jaw tightening. I've been the only one fighting for this marriage for years. I can't do it alone anymore. Tears streamed down my face as I tried to process his words. You're saying you want to leave? I'm saying I need time, he said, standing up. Time to figure out if this is even worth saving. Eric, don't do this, I pleaded, but he was already walking toward the door. He turned back briefly, his face a mixture of sadness and resolve. I'll stay at a friend's place for now. I'll let you know when I'm ready to talk. And just like that, he was gone. The house felt impossibly empty without him. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized something that terrified me. This wasn't just a fight. This was a breaking point, and I wasn't sure if we could come back from it. The days after Eric left were a blur of guilt, fear, and self-recrimination. I kept expecting him to call or text, to come home and tell me he'd overreacted. But the silence stretched on, and with each passing day, the weight of what I'd done grew heavier. I tried to keep busy, focusing on the kids and the routines of daily life, but nothing felt normal anymore. Mia and Ethan noticed the shift, their innocent questions cutting deeper than any argument with Eric could. "Where's Daddy?" Mia asked one night as I tucked her in. "He's staying with a friend for a little while," I said, forcing a smile. "Is he mad at us?" she whispered, her big brown eyes filled with worry. My chest tightened. "No, sweetheart. He's not mad at you. He loves you very much." She nodded, but her expression remained uncertain, and as I kissed her goodnight, I felt tears prick my eyes. When I was finally alone, I allowed myself to break. I sat on the living room couch, staring at the empty space where Eric used to sit, and cried until I couldn't anymore. A week passed before I finally worked up the nerve to call him. My heart pounded as the phone rang, but it went straight to voicemail. "Eric," I said, my voice trembling. "Can we please talk? I miss you. The kids miss you. I need to know what you're thinking." No response came that day, or the next. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that he finally agreed to meet. He suggested a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. The fact that he didn't want to come home stung, but I didn't argue. I was desperate for a chance to fix things. When I arrived, Eric was already there, sitting at a corner table. He looked different, tired, yes, but also more distant than I'd ever seen him. "Thanks for coming," I said as I slid into the seat across from him. He nodded but didn't say anything. "How are you?" I asked awkwardly, unsure of where to start. "I'm fine," he said simply. "How are the kids?" "They miss you," I said, my throat tightening. "We all do." He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Amanda, I didn't come here to rehash everything. I need you to understand where I'm coming from." "Okay," I said quickly. "I'm listening." He paused, his eyes searching mine. "That night, when you said I was your second choice, it wasn't just the words, it was what they meant. It made me realize how little I've felt valued in this marriage. I've spent years trying to be everything you need, and it feels like none of it has ever been enough." "That's not true," I said, my voice cracking. "I love you, Eric. I appreciate everything you do." "Do you?" he asked quietly. "Because it doesn't feel that way. It feels like you've spent our entire marriage comparing me to someone I'm not, someone I can never be." Tears welled in my eyes, but I blinked them back. "I didn't realize you felt like this," I said. "That's the problem," he said, his voice tinged with sadness. "You didn't realize, and I don't know if I can keep being in a relationship where I feel invisible." My breath hitched. "So what are you saying? That you're giving up?" "I'm saying I need more than what we have," he said firmly, "and I don't think I can get that with you anymore." The words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "Eric, please," I whispered. "I can change. I'll do whatever it takes. Just give me another chance." He shook his head, his expression resigned. "I've given so many chances, Amanda. I'm sorry, but I can't keep doing this. I need to put myself first for once." He stood, leaving money for his coffee on the table. "I'll be in touch about the kids," he said softly. And then he was gone, leaving me alone in a crowded cafe, the weight of his words crushing me. Eric didn't come back. The divorce papers arrived a month later, delivered by a courier. Holding them in my hands felt surreal, like a final blow to a fight I hadn't even realized I'd lost. I stared at his signature on the dotted line, my heart sinking. This was really happening. There would be no late-night apologies, no tearful reconciliations. I was losing him, and this time it was for good. The next few weeks were a haze of logistics and heartbreak. We divided our belongings, scheduled time with the kids, and tried to keep things civil for their sake. Every meeting with him felt like walking on a tightrope, the polite words we exchanged masking the raw pain underneath. Eric moved into a small apartment across town. When I dropped the kids off for their first weekend with him, I couldn't stop myself from glancing inside. It was sparse but cozy, and a few new photos of Mia and Ethan were already framed on the walls. He'd built a new space for himself, a life that didn't include me. In the months that followed, I began to confront the truth of what had happened. Therapy became a lifeline, a place where I could unpack the years of resentment and insecurity that had built up in our marriage. "I always thought Eric would stay," I confessed to my therapist one afternoon. "No matter what I said, no matter how I treated him, I thought he'd keep fighting for us." She nodded, her expression gentle but firm. "It sounds like you took his love for granted, Amanda. That kind of love needs to be nurtured, not tested." Her words cut deep, but they were exactly what I needed to hear. I started reflecting on the moments I'd brushed off. Eric's quiet acts of kindness, his tireless efforts to provide for us, the way he'd always put the family first. I'd seen those things as obligations rather than gifts, and I'd repaid them with criticism instead of gratitude. One afternoon, while cleaning out the house, I found an old photo of us tucked into a drawer. It was from our honeymoon. Eric was grinning, his arms slung around my shoulders, both of us carefree and in love. I stared at the photo for a long time, wondering how we'd gone from that couple to the strangers we were now. But I knew the answer. It wasn't just the joke or the fight that followed. It was years of neglect, of failing to show him the respect and appreciation he deserved. Eric seems happy now. He's seeing someone, a woman the kids adore. When Mia talked about how Daddy's friend brought cookies to their game night, I felt a pang of jealousy but also relief. He'd found someone who saw him, who valued him the way I should have. As for me, I'm still learning. I'm learning how to be a better mother, a better person, and maybe, one day, a better partner. I'll carry the lessons of this heartbreak with me for the rest of my life. Love isn't unconditional when respect is absent. That's what I'll remember every time I think of Eric, his quiet strength, his patience, and the way I let it slip through my fingers,